Well, welcome everyone to our first ever virtual event for the Ravenswood Neighbors Association and promoting and learning about the news issues that are big around here. I just wanted to talk a little bit first about who we are as Ravenswood Neighbors Association, RNA, but very first, the format for tonight. So we're going to talk with Alex Hernandez, who is the reporter covering Ravenswood and the Lincoln Square, North Center neighborhood, Irving Park, and Albany Park neighborhoods of Chicago. He certainly has been seeing a lot in this COVID-19 era, so we'll talk about some stories that he thinks are particularly important, as well as maybe some stories that may emerge after this pandemic. But then also big is really you, the audience, and what you want to know, what you want to ask. So at any given time, if you go down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A session. And so type in your questions. You can type them in any time. And our moderator, Phil Thompson, who's our VP of RNA, will feed them over to us, and we'll answer those questions. Because a big part of tonight really is the interaction that you as neighbors have with our news sources and our journalists, and how we both stay informed. So that is the major format tonight, and it is our first one that we're doing on Zoom, so hopefully we get this mostly right. But the Ravenswood Neighbors Association is now about 5 years old. We were founded at the desire of Alderman Amaya Pawar back in 2015 to strengthen neighborhood organizations, and particularly the area of Ashland to Damon and Montrose Avenues to Lawrence Avenues. That area was unrepresented, and now 5 years later, for what it's worth, RNA has been on the scene, and now we've got over 2,200 Facebook followers and hoping to grow our official membership. We strive to connect neighbors as we inform the aldermen on planning and development issues, help neighbors build gardens in our parkways and our street corners. We mobilize neighbors to volunteer and donate for critical human needs. And we bring neighbors together for informative and hopefully post-pandemic real fun events just like this. So that is the Ravenswood Neighbors Association. Invite you to look us up on Facebook. Send us an email at ravenswoodneighbors@gmail.com to get more involved. And then over to Alex Hernandez. Alex has previously written for the Chicago Tribune, Chicago Reader, Chicago Magazine, and is one of the founders of Borderless Magazine. It's a real treat. He is a Peter Lissiger Award finalist, and he's here to talk about the issues in our neighborhood. So Alex, welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me at this meeting. It's really, really cool.
Excellent, excellent. You've been. How long have you been with Block Club Chicago? And tell us a little bit about the organization.
Yeah, for sure. So if anyone here that's listening remembers DNA Info Chicago, that's kind of how Block Club got started. Essentially what happened was a few years ago, the owner of DNA Info Chicago decided to get out of the publishing industry. When he closed that publication down, it kind of led to a situation where a lot of readers reached out to reporters and editors at DNA Info Chicago asking, hey, like, how am I going to get this local street level gumshoe reporting coverage of my area? Well, 3 of the editors, my bosses now, heard that, and they decided, well, you know, why don't we just start it on our own as a nonprofit? So that's kind of how Block Club started. It started, I want to say, like 3 years ago now. I was there at the beginning of it, but I actually wasn't part of the original like rollout team, if that makes any sense. When they did the Kickstarter to fund the initial like seed money and everything to launch our like newsroom startup, if a stretch goal was met in that Kickstarter, they were going to hire 2 additional reporters. The Kickstarter for Block Club Chicago was one of the fastest, if not, I think still the most quickly funded journalism Kickstarters that's ever been in Kickstart. So because of how quickly that was funded, myself and another reporter got added to the initial rollout team. So over these past couple of years, like thanks to readers like you, I have a job. So thank you.
Yeah. What need does Block Club fill, and what niche within news here in the city do you guys believe you fill?
Yeah, so decades and decades ago, if you look like an old phone tree or directory of Chicago Sun-Times, Chicago Tribune, or if you're old enough, if you remember like the Chicago Daily News, you would see it like in the 1970s, 1980s. Their phone tree set up where they would have like Ravenswood, for instance, would have maybe 3 or 4 reporters from just one publication covering just that area of the neighborhood, right? Time goes on, we're in 2020 now, and there's really no neighborhood beat reporter set up in the city of Chicago outside of Block Club. We're basically, it's kind of funny because what we're doing isn't that innovative, if that makes any sense. It's old shoe leather reporting. I live in Irving Park. Before the pandemic, I would regularly go get coffee in all the neighborhoods I cover. I would swing by Ravenswood all the time to go like run on a grocery run sometimes, or run for an errand. And sometimes when I'd be walking around, I would see a building permit on a lot. I would take a photograph of it and start following up, or I would see a bunch of construction workers building out a restaurant interior. So I just walk over and give them my card while I had like my bag of groceries and be like, hey, I know this used to be this restaurant. Can you give us the new owner? Tell them I want to chat. Do you know what kind of restaurants come in here? And that would lead to a story. So it's something where the thing that I always tell people is you really can't report on neighborhoods like Ravenswood from a desk in the loop. Like you really have to be in the neighborhood, walking around and talking to people. And that's kind of like the niche that the Block Club I think fills really, really well. The other example I always give is my colleague, Nina Bloom. She's the person who broke the Chance the Snapper story. And again, the reason she was able to break that story, she was actually in Humboldt Park, nearby the actual park, covering, I think like a business closing or something. She was trying to get a hold of the owner, and she got a text message from one of her regular sources, basically telling her, hey, I think there's a gator in the lagoon. So she just walked over to the lagoon, and this person showed her a photograph of what looked like a gator. And, Mina was like, yeah, that's a gator. So then we started our, odyssey of trying to track down where this thing came from, and then the whole circus around trying to capture it and everything. So, I mean,
So
that's the thing.
So Block Club broke that story?
Yeah, that was Nina Bloom. She was the person who broke that story. And again, it's because we live and we work and we just hang out in the neighborhoods we all cover. Like,
yeah, awesome. So let's get to it, Alex. Tell us about the story, or a big story that you have been really investing a lot of time in that affects Ravenswood.
Yeah. So one thing that I actually was working on today was Malt Row. So earlier in the pandemic, I wrote a story about how all of the brewers in Malt Row lost their keg sales pretty much overnight when the dine-in ban went into effect. That's because street festivals, restaurants, bars, basically anywhere where you would get a draft beer, all these small independent breweries that are in Malt Row and then the rest of the city, they really rely on those sales to cover their overhead. And then on top of that, it's their on-site sales of their tap rooms that, again, they're selling directly to customers. So all of that vanished overnight during the dine-in ban. So actually the story coming up tomorrow, which you guys are kind of getting the scoop on, I talked to Big Teeth Productions, which is a video production company here in Ravenswood on Malt Row, that decided to do this really cool pro bono thing where they basically created this really cool contest where if you go to 3 of the breweries that are in their like list of Malt Row and just outside Malt Row breweries, save your receipt and fill out a form, you get this really cool t-shirt that says like Beer Hero and the logo they created for it. And again, it's like this really cool business helping businesses, because video production company itself was in a situation where, you know, they were trying to figure out how to adapt like everyone else to this new, you know, normal that we have for the foreseeable future. And they figured that they could, you know, do a nice thing for free for all these breweries after they read that story. So it's kind of an ongoing covering thing I've been doing. The churches, of course, that have been defying the stay-home order. It's another thing that every Saturday and Sunday, I just kind of wait for the other shoe to drop in a development regarding that. So, you know, I never know until it happens, and then I find out, and then I cover it. So
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, you know, on that very topic, you know, you're a journalist. You are really covering things objectively and trying to get to the facts, as you and I had talked about. I did want to go into it. You know, the Philadelphia Romanian Church of God is right here in our neighborhood, and reading the story, it looks like you've talked with the pastor. Tell us a little bit about what motivates them, and I think it's a big issue in our neighborhood.
Yeah, so there's a lot of context on what's going down with that. There's 3 churches that I'm aware of, and I'm trying to verify if other churches have had in-person services in addition to these 3, but these are the 3 that I have verified on my own, and our newsroom has verified have been hosting these in-person services through the month of May. For the Romanian churches specifically, one in Albany Park and the one that you talked about, Philadelphia, here in Ravenswood, the pastors that I've spoken to, their point of view is they're equating a lot of the restrictions regarding the churches to what they experience either personally or secondhand, depending on how old their congregation is, and whether or not they're immigrants from Romania during the Cold War. So it's one thing where they just have it in their kind of background and experience of not liking these types of restrictions. The one Albany Park church who's taken a very vocal, loud lead and has sued the governor, trying to basically get an exception for his church regarding the stay-at-home order. He keeps on pointing out that he's doing social distancing guidelines. Both the Ravenswood Church and the Albany Park Church have been putting caution tape to separate seats when people sit down. Like if you read either one of the articles, I have screen caps from their live streams where you know, people are socially distanced. According to the Albany Park pastor, he's sanitizing the entire building in between services. And then when I spoke to the Ravenswood pastor, he basically told me too that he set up a Google form where they kind of pre-screen people for symptoms via Google form, and then also recommended anyone who works in the healthcare field and anyone who's over the age of 65 who could potentially be a high risk for the virus to not go in person, right? They encourage those people to stream at home. The flip side of that, though, is that over the weekend, the Department of Health she sent a letter basically saying, even with those restrictions in place, you're running a risk, right? The CDC guidelines from the federal government do give a lot of the same advice that these 2 churches are following when it comes to social distancing, when it comes to caution tape separating the seats and everything. But that said, another one of the guidance lines in this CDC recommendations is the best way to avoid the virus is to not encounter the virus, right? And it does recommend these types of what we're doing right now, these Zoom meetings, or online digital worship services, right? So it's a back and forth issue between the city and these pastors and where they're coming from on that. Right now, it seems like they're both in a holding pattern. I keep on asking the city for clarification. 2 weeks ago, they got, prior to this weekend, the city gave citations for disorderly conduct to these 3 churches for violating the stay-at-home order. This past weekend, Dr. Awade, the head of the Chicago Department of Health, she sent a letter saying they would be declared a public nuisance and she would use her authority as the head of the health department to potentially shut them down. Both times that the city did that, the churches were defiant and said, well, this is not going to change my mind on this. I'm still going to host services. When I asked the city what that meant, that letter, the same thing where they're saying, well, there's a potential for further escalation, but they won't say what that escalation would be. It would be additional fines, which don't seem to be deterring them, or it would be something like the Albany Park pastor basically said he's worried about them like barricading the building where they can't get it into the public regarding health. So again, I'm kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop on that, because both sides have been kind of saying the same thing over the past 2 or 3 weeks, where the city keeps on saying, we're going to fine you for keep on doing this, or we're going to cite you for the citation for doing this. And then the pastors keep on saying, I'm going to keep on doing this regardless of citation.
Got it. Got it. And then out to the audience too, if you have any questions at any given time, or questions you may have seen, or you're feeling news stories, or what's going on with what, like we're here to take your questions and pose them to Alex and see if he's got a take on them. What, Alex, you've got colleagues across the city who are working, kind of with this story on you. Is there any date in mind that's been put out there for when churches could come back together?
Yeah, so potentially it could be on one of the other phases that get rolled out, and that's actually a point of contention for the pastors. They want to be declared the same type of essential service that a grocery store or a hardware store or a liquor store is, right? They want to be in the current phase we're in right now. They would prefer to be given the okay to host in-person services. The state and the city keep on saying that it's probably a later phase that it's safe for hosting in-person services. And that's actually one of the points of contention that keeps on going up over and over again. My colleague, Kelly Bauer, who live tweets every single press conference, like daily. I don't know if you guys have a chance to follow her, you should. You'll get the most up-to-date, like as it happens, updates. Like I follow her for my own story sometimes. Like I'm busy calling restaurant owners to see how they're like managing the shutdown and everything, or I'm trying to figure out what's going on with these churches and other things. And then like I'll pop into my Twitter and I'll see Kelly like, live tweeting the governor just said XYZ about the shutdown, or the mayor said XYZ about the shutdown. And then it's like, oh, I can use this in my story. So I just send her a text real quick, like, hey, I'm going to pull this from your Twitter, and then just start working on the story. So yeah, it's been really, really interesting to have to adapt to covering all this. Kelly today reported a story where, unfortunately, the state of Illinois has crossed the threshold of 5,000 people dead from the virus. Yeah. So there's over 5,000 people who have died from it as of today. Nationally, I think we're close to about 100,000 if we haven't already passed that threshold. Last headline I saw before I logged in. So that's.
Are there any localized numbers for this area?
The nearest hotspot that I checked was over by Edgewater a couple weeks ago. We ran a couple stories about that. Joe Ward wrote about that and how that area seemed to be a hotspot. Another hotspot on the north side was Belmont-Cragen area. As of now, I'm not 100% sure that the Ravenswood area is faring much differently than the other areas. I'd have to check the data again and get back to you. I do know that the data is, some of it has like a delay on it as the numbers come in, but it's really, really accurate for us, and it's really been helping us structure our reporting around the data. So for instance, when Joe Ward's article came out about the hotspot on his beat, which is like just northwest of mine or northeast of mine, that data was super helpful in trying to like pinpoint with elected officials. Okay, so what have you heard? Like, this is what we're getting from the state health department. This is how many reported cases we have. So then what's going on that you think could be the cause of this? So that's kind of how we've been treating that. And then on top of that too, just trying to cover the guidelines when it comes to how safely, go for a walk in the park, ride your bicycle. The parks, playgrounds, you can't use them, right? But you can still physically exist in a park and go for like a walk to keep your sanity. I remember I wrote a story earlier in the pandemic where I spoke to a nurse who teaches at the City Colleges of Chicago, and she basically explained to me how nurses who work in like intensive care units or in like infectious disease wards, what they do to come home to try to like minimize the risk of bringing a pathogen home to their family, right? And so that was basically a how-to story of this is the steps she takes and her best practices in her field that you could take when you have to, you know, go work at a grocery store or you're going to shop at a grocery store and like it's unavoidable kind of thing.
Right.
So like there was that, I think, sorry, I'm rocking back on my hammock in the yard.
Don't fall off, please.
Articles. Hannah wrote a bunch of articles about how safely go jogging. She's an avid runner and how to do that. And we're just trying to keep up with the science to that way we could like present the most accurate information to Chicago and how to do stuff.
Good. Alex, we've got some questions and Phil will pose them.
Yeah, a few questions that came in. First is a comment from Linda W, who just wants to thank Alex and Block Club. She said you can't imagine a time without local coverage. So thank you, Linda.
Thank you. Really appreciate it, Linda.
And then we have a question from Dr. Nate Mendez. And he's asking, this is related to the Ravenswood Church issue. Have any of the institutions that are defying non-essential gathering orders offered the city and the Department of Health a detailed written plan for social distance during services to make their case stronger?
The church the Albany Park Church, who's part of the lawsuit against Governor Pritzker, they actually detailed what their social distancing plans were. And it's actually in that lawsuit. And it's in the article too, where I reported it, where I basically explained what the pastor explained to me and how they were doing it. The federal judge who ruled on that, I think it was like 3 weeks ago now or 2 weeks ago now, you have to read the article, I don't have the data in my head, actually disagreed with those social distancing guidelines. That judge kind of did a paragraph by paragraph kind of deconstruction of what they were currently doing to prevent those deaths. And in that step-by-step instruction, or his opinion, I guess you could say, the judge in his response to the lawsuit, cited a Washington State church where a number of congregants got sick, even with similar social distancing measures in place. The letter that Dr. Aurde sent over the weekend, she also referenced a Arkansas church who also tried to do social distancing and also had a number of people get sick, including 3 deaths from the virus at that congregation. So the pastors have presented in legal documents to federal judges their plan. They've talked to me about them, had me write about them when they shared, you know, what was happening there. I was able to present it to the public and to the city, and also basically point out to the city, this is what they're doing, and what's your opinion on that? I mean, that's where the city council members, the mayor, the governor, and the Department of Health in the city have all kind of said, it's not good enough, we're sorry. So it's kind of an ongoing conversation there, even with the CDC guidelines. So again, it's something I'm still going to be covering. I don't anticipate not covering it. And honestly, like I said, every Saturday and Sunday, I kind of wait to see what's going to happen. For instance, I'm not sure how many people subscribe to the newsletter for specifically the neighborhood stuff that I write. But if you did, you heard that Saturday afternoon, I was tooling around in my garage listening to music when I got a tip that letter had gone out to those 3 churches from the city's Department of Health. So I just opened my laptop, turned off music, and just started making phone calls from the garage trying to get the story out to you guys as fast as I could. So it's really interesting because it's like, we tried to have a semblance of a weekend at Block Club, but with this pandemic, everything's kind of like topsy-turvy, if that makes any sense. Like we were always on call before, but the level of being on call during a pandemic is really exhausting.
We have another question. This is related to the CTA. C. Hoffman asks, she says, I walked past the Montrose Brown Line stop today, and there weren't even signs saying that masks are required. Have you heard of any plans?
I haven't heard any plans from the CTA on this. I do know that, and actually, most of our reporters today were kind of scrambling to figure this out. The shared streets and the open stuff and everything they're doing, that's kind of tied into all this, where what are the guidelines there for the city of Chicago? I know that the CTA has been sanitizing its buses and cars more frequently than they normally do because of this pandemic. And the mayor has been at her press conference saying repeatedly that she doesn't think that shutting down the CTA during a pandemic would be a good idea, just because it is still a necessary means of transport for essential workers. You take away that and you're creating a whole new level of lack of infrastructure then for essential workers to get to and from their jobs if they don't drive or, travel another means, right? As far as I know, though, I haven't seen any kind of, personally, I haven't seen any kind of signs either, and I haven't seen any kind of specific instruction at CTA stops or at bus stops regarding this. I think, and I could look into this further, and actually that's one of the reasons I wanted to be in this call, so I can get some story ideas from you guys of what's, being pointed out to you, things that you're seeing that maybe I haven't seen. But I would definitely look further into if the city's general guidelines for social distancing and what they're recommending to do are just kind of like the blanket thing of do all these things that we're telling you, not just at the CTA, but also on your front porch, on the sidewalk, at the parking lot, at a park. That would be my best analysis of that. But again, I think some further reporting would be warranted.
You had mentioned the Shared Streets Initiative, and Tim Looney has a question related to that. He just wonders if there are any updates on streets being opened up to walkers, runners, bicycles in the area.
Yeah, so a couple weeks ago, Alderman Matt Martin of the 47th Ward asked constituents to basically, and neighbors basically, to answer on a map, an interactive digital map, where are you seeing congestion, right? Where are you running into situations when you can't stay 6 feet or more apart from someone when you're walking? The way that Josh Mark, the director of infrastructure over at Martin's office, kind of described it is they want us to stay 6 feet away from everybody, but some of the sidewalks are 5 feet or less. So how do you manage that when you're social distancing? So that map went live, and very quickly there was a number of people who started, flagging problem areas in the 47th Ward, right? Today, early this morning, we got word that the Department of I can't speak anymore. I really apologize for that. The Chicago Department of Transportation had started basically assigning permits to various areas of the city that would have this. And we actually have a story on Block Club right now that has the current list of verified shared open streets that are going to be rolled out. Right now, I think right before I got on the call, I actually went through the website. Sorry, you were going to say something, Andy?
Oh, I think Leland Avenue is going to be one, correct?
Yeah, I believe that's true. The list is being updated. We actually got word of it because the city actually has this website, which is really, really cool, where if you ever need to look up why street work is happening on your block or whatever, there's this really cool interactive website, which I can share to Andy after the call so people can look it up on their own. But any kind of road work, any kind of infrastructure work, you can look up the permit for it, right? And the city has all the data on there. This actually rolled out, I want to say like a year and a half ago. Now a lot of people know about it. I feel like more people should know about it because it's a really, really useful resource. Me personally, not even as a journalist, if I see a bunch of like construction trucks on my block just parking and I don't know where they're going to start working, and I was like, oh, I got to start planning where I'm going to park my car now. I can just go on that website. I can usually find the permit of why all those trucks are parked because I know exactly then where they're going to be doing stuff from like the alleged duration of point A to like from this date to this date.
What's the site?
Sure. You know what? If you will excuse me for one moment,
you can type in Zoom webinar allows you to type into all the panelists or all the attendees.
Give me 1 sec. It's actually a really cool resource. So I just got to scroll back into my own notes here. Give me 1 sec. So I was actually talking about it with some of my colleagues earlier today. But yeah, no, it's a really, really cool resource that is super, super interactive. There's sometimes a delay on the permits, but it's not by much. Here, I'm gonna try this now. So where do I send this in?
So you would go to the chat, and then you go to address it to all panelists and attendees.
Oh,
It's
cool.
on the drop down.
Perfect. Give me 1 sec then. Okay, to all panelists, there's the link. shystreetwork.chicago.gov.
Wow.
It's if you play around with that, it is so helpful.
So when you get called on Saturday for something, you're like, I'm sorry, I'm busy looking at this website. I can't do anything right now.
Sandy,
Actually,
yeah.
since I know I can do links now
Oh.
too, which actually I've actually never done this in a Zoom meeting before.
Hold on, Alex. So can you type that again for all attendees? And I can do it. You're the guest of honor. Hold on, let me do it.
No, I see it. All panelists and attendees. Okay, so there's a link to Chicago's Block Club Chicago's list of the streets that we are aware of. They're going to be converted to like open shared streets, and then the second link is Shy Street Work. So at your leisure, check both out. Shy Street Work is from the city's Department of Transportation, and it is just a really great resource to find out why or how long supposedly something will happen when it comes to construction. Like if I just scroll over to like the Ravenswood area, so I'm looking at Ravenswood over by, let me see, Lawrence and Ashland about. Actually, I go Lawrence and Ravenswood, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just there alone, I see 17 permits nearest to that intersection that I can click on. And then outside of that, there's like over 50 scattered about from all those side streets. And like the results that I'm looking at are like utility pole storage, manhole access, street resurfacing and restoration, a general opening of the street for infrastructure. And what's really, really great about this, and this is why I would recommend that neighbors should all use this website on a regular basis, it actually has the contractor the city hired out for that work. So like you can click on the permit for that work, and there's a PDF hyperlinked into there where it'll show the contract and who was hired to do that, right?
Yeah.
So in the past, I've actually written some stories where there was, and this was like in the middle of February, I want to say, either this year or last year. It's kind of all blurring together now. But there was just a huge, huge hole in this person's front lawn, essentially, that they put a metal cover over, and they just kind of like abandoned it, that contractor, for multiple months in a row. The guy got so annoyed, he set it up with Christmas decorations, and then he set it up with other holiday decorations to like just kind of his own passive aggressive way of getting them to fix that giant hole that they covered with like emergency cones on this big metal grate. And so I was able to look up on that website who the contractor was specifically that did that, because, you know, it's not just the city sometimes is doing these things, it's whoever the city hired to do the work.
Right.
So when I contacted the contractor was like, excuse you? And I was like, yeah, no, my name's Alex Hernandez. I'm a reporter. This is the neighbors, you know, very frustrated with what's going on in the front. Like, what's the timeline on this and everything? I think by the next day, the hole was filled in. And it was like all good to go.
That actually brings me to the next point. So we've got 23 participants on here, probably numerous who've logged in for free, sent around the world. So it's a big audience out here. And the question goes to, how do you want to interact with the public? And what's the best way to make good journalism work? What can they do?
Were helpful. Normally, I would be seeing you all probably at a community meeting of some sort, right? Whether it's like a zoning meeting for a building being built, or a community meeting about like public safety, or just like a cool thing about or even like a neighborhood festival, right? Like I would go to a neighborhood festival and I would see at like this festival some people that I knew from like the Chamber of Commerce, from the Neighbors Association, etc. And sometimes I'll just randomly talk like, hey, I heard X, Y, or Z, or hey, what's going on? Through our conversation, you know, there may be a story that comes out of it. You know, you never know where a story is. Right now, because of the stay-at-home order, it's very difficult to do those kinds of things, right? Earlier when I spoke about just running on a grocery run and seeing construction workers building out a restaurant and just walking over to those construction workers, that's all complicated now by this virus, right? So my contact info, which I shared to Andy earlier, I would hope after this, he shares it to all of you. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. Everyone at Block Club, reporters and editors, are extremely accessible. We're very online people. Even if you don't have my email handy, which every single article that I write, my email is on it, my Twitter handle is on it. You can even just like tweet at me and be like, hey, Alex, I heard X, Y, Z or so-and-so, right? The more you guys interact with me, the better I can do my job, basically. Specifically right behind their back because of the pandemic.
I think maybe it was just me, but lost you those past few seconds at the end. What were you saying?
What's the last thing you heard?
You said my email. I'll share it with you, and then.
Yeah. And then we're all very online, so you can basically just tweet at me too, be like, hey, Alex, I saw this. All of our contact info for every reporter is on the website. If you go to Block Club Chicago and look at the very bottom, it says our team. My email address is there too. All the email addresses for all the reporters. So let's say you're on this call and you don't live in Ravenswood, and for whatever reason you have a tip about something happening on the south side or in Lakeview or something like that. All the reporters, what they cover are there, and then their emails there. And then the last thing I said before I guess it got cut off was being able to interact with neighbors like this and being able to interact with all of you online is a real asset to us right now, because every single journalist I know is essentially reporting with one arm tied behind their back because of the virus, right? Normally I would go to a public meeting and like 4 stories would come out of that public meeting, right? Not just from the agenda that was at the meeting, but I may run into somebody that has like, hey, X, Y, or Z happened, or hey, did you see that restaurant over there is doing this, or the other? So it's that interaction really doesn't exist right now in a safe way, right? So.
Terrific. So it's pretend it's February 2020, and you were thinking about what you'd be writing about, on March, whatever day it is. What did you think you'd be writing about now?
I thought I would be writing about summer guides. So usually around the time that the weather gets warmer, we start putting together, here are all the summer festivals, here are all the summer farmers markets, here are all the cool, fun, like the fun things to do in the summer, right? We're trying to plan out our coverage and figure out how best to inform Chicago and how to, all the cool things you can do in a city like ours. That all out the window. The other thing I thought I was going to be covering were a lot of developments, right? A lot of construction in the city did not stop, but projects that were in the early stages that required a lot of public vetting still, those have all kind of come to a crawl just because the same public meetings I was talking about earlier. How can you have a community zoning meeting safely when, you can only do it over Zoom? And I feel we're finally getting to a point where the city of Chicago is figuring out best practices for those types of things online. I covered what I think is the very first Chicago CAPS police meeting ever handled on Zoom earlier in this pandemic. Unlike this meeting, which is very straightforward and pretty organized, because the Chicago Police Department had never done anything like that before, it was a really interesting experience because it was basically a free-for-all, because there wasn't like a moderator set up. And so it led to a lot of chaos. Some people were sharing pornography and a bunch of other insane things, like during the meeting, while the commander was trying to explain, you know, how they're addressing crime in the time of COVID and like property crimes and stuff in the Zoom meeting. Right after that, there was a city council meeting that also kind of devolved into shouting and really bad internet connections for some of the city council people that were on it. At this point, the city's got its sea legs, it looks, when it comes to these types of meetings. But then the question remains, if you're going to have a community zoning meeting on Zoom or on a digital format, how do you make sure that you're allowing every neighbor to participate if, you know, they don't speak English or they're not digitally native, or they're not, you know, if they don't have good Wi-Fi, for instance? Like, how do you cross that hurdle, right? So yeah, that's kind of my long-winded answer. I was expecting to cover a lot of fun server stuff and a lot of development stuff, and now it's mostly this got canceled, or this festival is going to be moved to an online-only event, or this development is stalled because of, you know, XYZ regarding the virus.
Good. We've got a couple questions.
Yeah, well, there's a comment from Sandy Gordon. She said, she pointed out the Alderman's newsletter just came out as this Zoom was starting, reporting that they're planning to start the pedestrian way as a test run on Leland's east of Lincoln on Friday. So she just
okay, that makes sense. That's actually a great tip, Sandy. Thank you for that. I actually forwarded that to my editors so they can update because that other story I sent, the Block Club story, to everybody, we're updating it as we get more streets. So I'll actually send that to my editors as soon as this call is over so we can update. But yeah, and that's what Martin was telling me about when we spoke previously about that map he was trying to get. I haven't read the newsletter, but I assume that Alderman Martin's a very data-focused guy. So the interactive map, I would assume that was one of the streets that they got data on as being congested, and that CDOT decided to, like, you know, roll out for the 47th.
Yeah, I was looking at the map today. There were a lot of thumbs up on it for people voting for that as a pedestrian walkway.
Yes, I can totally see that.
Yeah. Question from Alexandra Jamros. She asks, what is your favorite type of story to write about?
So I have a soft spot for mom and pop owners. My dad was a bar owner in Humboldt Park when I was growing up. He owned a banquet hall, restaurant, bar at North Avenue in Pulaski. And that's actually where I grew up. So like I ended up spending a lot of time there working with my dad when I was in grade school, in high school, in college, after college. Like before he passed away, that was like my other job all the time, right? So because of I kind of grew up in the restaurant industry, I really, really like talking to mom and pop owners and like small business owners about, you know, their little hole in the wall greasy spoon business. It's not always happy. For instance, like when I wrote about Jerry's closing over in North Center, but yeah, I mean, but at the same time, it was really cool to talk to the owner and talk to the specifically the longtime cook who was there. I mean, like the stories he was telling me about being a short order cook at Jerry's were like gave me flashbacks of, you know, cooking in my dad's restaurant. Those are kind of like my favorite stories to write.
There's a related question to that. Dorothy Hemming asks, what is your sense of how long the local businesses in Ravenswood, Lincoln Square, Irving Park can survive in this environment?
So it really depends on the industry. That's one thing I'll preface it with. Jimmy's Pizza Cafe has a problem where he's running out of pizza dough because people are just bombarding him with orders, especially on Thursdays and Fridays before the weekend starts. He's had to turn people away because of the sheer large volume of pizza orders, right? Now, this is why I say that every industry is different and it really depends on that. Jimmy Kang, the owner of Jimmy Pizza's Cafe, really had a really well thought out, solid infrastructure set up for delivery long before this happened, right? He knows how to do delivery. He knows how to do curbside pickup, and he's an expert at it. So when this happened and he had to transition to that, his dining space wasn't that large to begin with, and people rarely went there to like sit down and eat. Almost everybody was getting delivery for this, and almost everyone was getting curbside. So he's thriving. He himself worries that when more people, if more people lose their jobs because of how long this pandemic is going on, he's worried that those orders might start slowing down. But, over the past 10, 11 weeks that this pandemic has happened in Chicago with the shutdown and the dining ban, he's thriving still. So that's one example. Another example, though, is all those breweries I was talking about. They lost an insane amount of their keg sales, which is a huge chunk of all of their annual budget. So they're kind of struggling and trying to make up for that with delivery sales directly to people's doorsteps, which is something that the state of Illinois has never allowed until now. The state rules had to be loosened thanks to it's called the Illinois Brewers Guild, which is like a trade association for brewers in Illinois. They successfully lobbied to get those rules relaxed, where for the first time ever, you can get dovetailed delivered to your doorstep from the brewery directly. That's never ever happened in the city of Chicago before, right? And they're trying to make up for their loss of keg sales with these direct delivery sales, right? That's one way they're trying to do that. But then there's so many other businesses that I've talked to that just, if they relied on sit-down dining, and if they relied on that experience where you're physically going someplace, they are just running into walls, and they're either closing down to wait and see, or just going out of business. The same is true for venues in the city of Chicago. A lot of venues have tried to do online concerts, like the Hideout in Chicago has been trying to do that, and that's been moderately successful. At the same time, they're kind of asking people to donate and buy tickets for a digital thing where you would normally, physically be present. So that's what I've noticed the most. Businesses that are really kind of there's a fancy word for it that architecture people always say. I think it's called the third space, if that makes any sense. It's basically where people congregate, that you have you may kind of make connections with people you may not know, right? So think of your bars, think of your concert venues, think of your the parks, when people are all congregating and grilling and walking over to each other and hey, I ran out of coals, can I borrow some coals from your bag or whatever, right? That kind of simple interaction. All those places where that would normally happen, if they're a business, they're the ones that are kind of hurting the most right now. And the longer it goes on, the more that they're kind of running into a wall on this. That said, some of them have really gotten smart about how to adapt to this, right? So Baker Miller, which is in Lincoln Square, they adapted to this whole situation where they started doing prepackaged meals to go. They started hiring out-of-work chefs from other restaurants in the area to become guest chefs and share in the profit of these prepared gourmet meals they were doing, right? A video production guy who lived in North Park, his video production company went belly up overnight, pretty much, right? When that happened, he decided, well, I've been building my own grain as a hobby in my garage for my bread baking hobby. Maybe I could turn that into a business. And lo and behold, he was able to turn that into an insanely successful business because everyone in Chicago is baking bread. So, and they were running out of flour. They couldn't buy flour. So he ended up, delivering stone milled artisanal flour to the city of Chicago when they needed it. He got so successful, he's now actually setting up shop within Baker Miller in Lincoln Square. And Baker Miller is actually buying the flour from this guy because their regular run into the situation where they would get sold out too, because everyone was buying flour in bulk. So it's interesting. Everyone's adapting. Some people are thriving, some people are not. And again, it really, really depends on the industry.
Yeah. What do you know, Alex, about the major, I think it's a senior home going in and the old Ravenswood Hospital?
Yeah, so they were supposed to break ground on that.
That's on what, Sunnyside and, I forgot, Sunnyside and almost Damon?
Yeah, that's around Damon. State law got changed, I want to say last year, to allow that to happen. So the financing for a development like that is not like the financing, for instance, a three-story condo building or a three-story apartment building that's taking over a lot or taking over a building to like deconstruct it and build a new one in its place. For that type of housing, and often most affordable housing, requires additional levels of funding. If I recall correctly, the type of funding they were trying to get did need a state law to change it to allow them to do it once they got that state law changed. They were able to start moving forward on that. Again, the city of Chicago has not stopped construction, right?
No.
We've been able to build things, unlike some of the other states that have been impacted and areas that have been impacted by the virus. We've still been able to build things that were already underway, right?
Got it.
As far as I know, I think that project is still moving forward at a relatively normal pace. But I have to do a little more digging on that because it's something that I just haven't been able to touch on because, again, a lot of the developments that I've been covering are mainly, this is a new development that just got passed. Now the question mark is, what's the timeline for it? Something related to that directly, actually, with Jimmy's Pizza Cafe. The Department of Planning and Zoning in the city of Chicago approved the demolition of that building where Jimmy's Pizza Cafe is located this past week, last week. That said, even though it was approved by the city, when I talked to the developer for that building, he told me that at the earliest, maybe spring of 2021, they can do the destruction of the building to start building their new one. So everything has like a weird scale or sliding scale now on timelines.
Sure.
Does Jimmy's have a plan B? Do they have another location in mind?
Yeah, so I talked to Jimmy Kang and I wrote about the developer's plan last year. And so he was already aware of them. He was already, thanks to Block Club, like making plans on his own. He's actually looking at a couple different places. I actually have to touch base with him again later this week to figure out if he's able to lock down a place. But he's likely gonna leave the neighborhood to find a larger kitchen space where he can build it out from scratch so he can accommodate just the sheer volume of orders he's getting. When he looked around Lincoln Square, he couldn't find anything in his price range that he could build out at that he could, afford. So he's looking for a space that's going to be converted to a restaurant. It looks like he will build out the kitchen for that volume and then continue what he's doing. The good news is he also told me though that he plans to have both places running until the building is torn down. So both places there won't be a disruption in service basically to people's pizza. Like both places will be operating at the exact same time. If anything, this will increase capacity for its ability to like churn out pizza pies. And then two, the places he's looking that he told me about, he wasn't specific, but he did say that he anticipates having the same delivery zone. So even though he's leaving Lincoln Square, he's going to have roughly the same delivery zone when this new place opens up that he's looking at.
Good to know.
We've got about 6 minutes left. And Alex, wanted to ask you, so looking forward, what are the things that you're really interested in and you could see as stories developing that you would love to have the public involved in, maybe some of the folks who are on this call?
Yeah, I mean, one thing. For sure, yeah. So the shared streets, I would love everyone's opinion on those shared streets. What you think of them once they roll out, how they're working out for you. Are you using them? As we enter the next phases of this rollout plan, I know the city of Chicago is moving slower than other parts of the state, but when we do get to that point, I really want to know, how comfortable do you feel going to a place like a concert venue when that eventually is able to open up when they get to that point, right? How comfortable are you going to a bar or to a sit-down restaurant inside to eat? These are all questions I really want to know about. One really big question that's kind of been in the back of my mind throughout this whole pandemic. So I'm kind of spoiled. For most of my journalistic career, I've been able to work from home or work remotely. only a couple of my jobs have been like 9-to-5 office jobs, right? So as this incredibly spoiled person, I now have seen this most of the city of Chicago switch to remote work, switch to working at home. And now you've all kind of gotten a taste of it. So I'm really curious to see in the various industries when this is, this continued phases roll out, are your respective industries going to go back to 9-to-5 office cubicle spaces, or is there going to be accommodations for, more work at home? The reason I'm thinking about this is I think New Zealand the other day, the prime minister out there basically said that she's advocating for more work at home because she basically saw that the pandemic over there proved to her that people can be productive and it's kind of pointless to be in an office for some of these jobs, right? So these are all, questions. And of course, the most important thing is like, I don't know what I don't know, right? I go out into the neighborhood still, I get in my car and I drive, or I'll walk with my mask on and everything and just try to like see what I see. But I'm not going to public meetings anymore. I'm not sitting in coffee shops and eating sources anymore. All of you live in other parts of the city and spend more time, I would argue, in your specific, area of your block, your neighborhood, and you're going to see things that I don't know about. So anything that you see, even if you think it's barely a story, like feel free to reach out. I mean, I kind of have to me and Bloom on this. The person who reached out to her could have thought to themselves, "Oh, that's just a stick in the pond. It can't be an alligator. It's not a story." And then it turned into the Chance the Snapper story, right? Like you never know what's a story. You never know what's going to happen. So the most weird, minuscule thing, I always tell people, unlike other newsrooms, like Block Club sweats the small stuff. So, even if you don't think it's a story, let me know about it. It might be, who knows? And then the last thing I would say is support local journalism. I mean, subscribers are such a huge amount of our ability to do what we do. It's not just the story tips. It's not just the notes, which I appreciate the notes like you wouldn't believe. When people say like, earlier in this Zoom meeting, when someone just thank you for the coverage, that it's really, really, I never get tired of hearing that. But then of course too, it's like, subscribe to Block Club, tell your friends to subscribe to Block Club. There are so many newsrooms that are going through a really hard time during this period. And I feel incredibly lucky to be at Block Club, where we're able to, weirdly enough, hire an editor and 2 new reporters during the middle of all this. So it's like, it's crazy.
Awesome. Yeah, I just a little aside, I used to read DNA and I never thought to buy it. And then, you get older and you think, boy, it's really important to have a resource and a storyteller and a group to speak truth to power. And it's kind of old fashioned stuff, but I've subscribed to Block Club and I've just found a lot of value out of it. And behind all the stories are actual people. And when you get to meet some of the people, it's pretty neat. So I first wanted to thank Phil for being our moderator and fielding all these great questions from the our members and our followers at RNA. And then Alex, thanks for joining us tonight.
No, thanks for having me. I really, really, really appreciate this. And I look forward to hearing from everybody.
Yeah, maybe we'll do another event like this.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
Before we end, the Ravenswood Neighbors Association has a couple things going on. We are doing right now a matched fundraiser for Ravenswood Community Services. So all of the food donations and meals that they provide, we've got a donor who's going to match a gift. So check us out there. We've got a planning and development committee. So for all the things that Alex talked about, we weigh in and advise the aldermen. So if you're interested in those things, reach out to us. I run our greening committee and all the gardens, and Phil is doing good work in building our membership, providing real value to you and so you can put out that you're a member of RNA. So I think that's it. Everyone, thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Yeah. Stay safe and have a really good night. Thank you so much for having me.
You bet.
Thanks so much, Alex.